I have an apology to make. It's not something I'm comfortable doing, but it's important that I get it out. And here's the deal. Last week, I not only on this podcast, but on a Michigan podcast, the Michigan State of Mind podcast, I picked against Indiana. I said the Wolverines were going to storm into Bloomington and come out with a 27-20 victory. As you all know, that did not happen. Not only did Indiana win, but Indiana blew Michigan out. I mean, it was a 17-point final, but it could have been a lot more. Tom Allen and Michael Penix and Walt Fillier and Ty Freifogel and the entire defense, I'm sorry. I screwed up. I don't know if this is going to be the worst mistake I make of my life, but
it is.
But it's up there. And look, they were clear about it. The coaches and the players talked about how the media and college football fans aren't expecting much out of Indiana. And they even called out the haters. And I guess I was one of them last week. What can I say? So from here on out, I'm probably just not going to pick against Indiana for the rest of the season. I don't know how it's going to be. Maybe they'll just go into Columbus and win. I don't know, because things are upside down and 2020 is crazy and your Indiana Hoosiers are ranked number 10. But folks, thanks for joining us today. It's episode 168 of the Hoosier Sound. Now that I've gotten that off my chest, we are here, the official podcast of Indiana HQ. Our mission and goal is simple. We want to bring in-depth analysis and coverage for Indiana University sports across a multitude of modern platforms. We're recording this edition on November 10th, 2020, where I am your apologetic host, Nithin Krishnan. And here with me tonight is my usual partner, Matt Lukens. Matt, how's life? You did pick Indiana last week, and you said it was going to be 37-17. Final was 38-21. What else can you tell me about my future?
I don't know what I can tell you about your future, but I can tell you that I got a bit lucky this weekend. Let's just put it that way with the prediction. I had us beating Michigan in the preseason, by the way, when we did our preseason prediction. I had us upsetting Michigan. You had us upsetting Penn State. So while you're apologetic from the preseason perspective, we are both 1-1 in both those two games. Both of us had IU sitting at 2-1 heading into playing Michigan State. And our preseason predictions, but here we are sitting 3-0, top 10 in the country. I don't think I thought this was going to happen at the beginning of the year, but I am obviously pleasantly surprised. Actually, I'm not surprised. I'm pleasantly happy. The results have come through. Finally, this team has learned to finish. You know, I was listening to Tom Allen was on the Pat McAfee podcast today, which is always the Pat McAfee show is always fun to listen to. Love Pat Mac. He was talking about the one word philosophy. Like, I believe this year's word is relentless. So be relentless in everything that they do. Of course, we know finish and breakthrough were like former words. And it's nice to see like all of Tom Allen's plans at Indiana are coming into fruition. Of course, they could be slightly derailed come Saturday at Michigan State. We'll get into the Spartans in a bit. But that Michigan game was basically the culmination of everything that Tom Allen has been working for the last 4 years here at IU.
Yeah, and you know, the word for the year is relentless. And then we found out a few days ago that the word for this week is dominate, which is certainly an interesting word to pick as an 8-ish point favorite going into Michigan State after a 17-point win over the Michigan Wolverines. IU was number 13 when the win happened. They moved up 3 spots to number 10 in the country. It's the first 3-0 Big Ten start for Indiana since 1988, which was a season that Indiana ended with a bowl win. So that's always a good sign. Michael Penix was just doing his thing at quarterback. No big deal. 30 of 50, 60%, 342 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks, no interceptions for the second consecutive game after getting into some trouble against Penn State in week 1. Ty Freifogel was the star receiver of the day. 7 catches, 142 yards, and a touchdown. If you listen to our podcast, you knew that Matt and I have repeatedly talked about how Ty Freifogel is going to be a breakout player in this offense. If you didn't listen to us, that's on you. And if you didn't tell your friends and family about us, that's on you. Ty Freifogel had over 130 receiving yards against Penn State last year. He topped that with a career and he topped that with a career high 142 against Michigan. No big deal. Oh, by the way, the star wideout on this team, Watt Fillier, was targeted 21 times on Saturday, had 11 catches for 79 yards, constantly finding little gaps in the Michigan defense and causing problems for the Wolverines' putrid secondary. Peyton Hendershot, 4 for 31. He scored also. Miles Marshall, 3 for 36. He scored in his first game of the season. The defense had 2 interceptions. They forced 7 punts. They had 3 sacks. I mean, Matt, just your general thoughts on the game against Michigan, where Indiana beat the Wolverines for the first time since 1987, snapping a 24-game losing streak. What numbers, players, things like that, what stood out to you from Indiana's third win of the season?
What stood out to me was 30 for 50 for Penix. 30 for 50. We threw the ball 50 times against this Michigan team. We found that what worked against this Michigan team, which is that their corners, their secondary is awful. Is really bad. Like, this is the worst Don Brown run secondary that I can personally remember. Out of all the teams he's ever coached, this might be the worst. I think every other play, I was arguing for a pass interference call that could have been called on a Michigan corner. Like, they're just grabbing and hoping that, they pull them down. The 15-yard penalty would be like almost as bad as the 35-yard completion that we would have gotten off that play. It's really bad there in Michigan. Penix looked great though. Good old Michael Penix just whipping the ball around, left-handed delivery, looking like smooth silk. It's wonderful. And we didn't have much of a run game, right? We were 24 rushes for 97 yards for Stevie Scott. The best runs, honestly, he had was 15 yards, but I thought Samson James had a couple of really good runs. Even though he was 8 for 25. Both of them are averaging less than 4 yards. 4 yards or less than 4 yards a carry on the season. That's meh numbers, right? These aren't great. We're not really establishing the run, but when you're throwing 30 for 50 for 342, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, like, you're going to get away with this. And looking into next week is a team that definitely is reeling, giving up 113 yards on 14 carries. And then 38 yards on 2 carries. Like, Iowa was running all over Michigan State's defense last week, and that's going to spell trouble for this Michigan State team. If we're going to be able to run, and you have to sell out on the run, you give Penix time to throw against a weaker secondary, all of a sudden, it's going to look a lot like what last week looked like for this Michigan State team next week.
Yeah, I think we're gonna get into Spartans in a minute. The stat to me from the win over Michigan that stands out the most is that the Wolverines ran the ball 18 times for 13 yards.
Yes.
1-3, not 30, not 113, not 313. Michigan ran for 13 yards total against this IU run defense, which had been a little vulnerable the first 2 weeks. And in fact, I jumped on the Michigan State of Mind podcast last week, and I said if Michigan's going to win this game, they've got to run the ball 40 times. And if they can run it 40 times, they're going to find gaps in the Indiana defense, and that'll help Michigan control the clock and control the scoreboard. And none of that happened.
If they had ran the ball 40 times, they might have gotten 40 yards.
They might have gotten 40 yards. I think they would have eventually broken off a few, but that's neither here nor there because it didn't happen. They ran it 18 times. A few of those are quarterback sacks, so those don't really count at all. I mean, Joe Milton had 5 of those 18 carries, so you can do the math right there yourselves. They have 4 capable running backs, and none of them found anything against this Indiana defense. The Hoosiers dominated the trenches against the Michigan Wolverines on both sides of the ball. The offensive line gave up no sacks. The defensive line held them to 13 rushing yards. I mean, that alone should keep Michigan fans up at night for the rest of the season. I mean, that's unbelievable. And look, IU's got a lot of depth. And there's no question about it. We've talked about it time and time again. On the offensive side, it's awesome to have blossoming offensive tackles like Caleb Jones and Matt Bedford. I think Harry Kreider's doing a good job, as the center on this offense. Defensively, Jerome Johnson and Big CEO and James Head and DeMarcus Elliott, they're obviously getting better and better and better up front. But no one would have expected this group to limit Michigan to 13 rushing yards. And I think that's the big story of the day. And if you ask me, that's really the big story of the day from Saturday. Michigan was 3 for 11 on third down. How about this stat? Michigan didn't have a drive that lasted more than 2.5 minutes until the last drive of the game. I mean, they got the ball, and then they either punted it. A couple times they had a quick score, but they had 7 punts out of their 10 drives that game. 7 punts and 3 touchdowns ended up getting their 21 points. Indiana, on the other hand, had 5 drives of double-digit plays. 5 drives that went 10 or more, and then there was one that was 9 that ended up in a touchdown too. Michigan had none of those all game. Michigan didn't have a single drive that was at least 10 plays. So when you control the clock and you control the scoreboard, that's going to help you win any game. That's the recipe to beat Ohio State. In all honesty, in 2 weeks. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but that's how you do it. So Indiana went out and controlled the game, and we're able to win. Let's talk about our players of the game, Matt. For me, in my recap for Indiana HQ back on Saturday afternoon, I said Ty Freifogel was the star of the game. It's no surprise. I mean, there are a lot of people you could choose from in this contest. Freifogel, especially in the first half, was way better than whatever Michigan secondary could throw at him. He beat guys in man-to-man. He beat guys in zone. He had a touchdown there over I think it was Vincent Gray off a free play. And I mean, I think I just saw a Michigan defensive lineman outside jump offsides. It's crazy. Yeah, just right outside my apartment. I saw it right here. I just yelled hut, 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 and the Michigan jersey guy. Yeah, the guy in the Michigan jersey jumped offside. It was crazy. And so that was unbelievable. But Freifogel, I'm not sure if that was a game that put him on the map as far as Big Ten first team or Big Ten second team receiver goes. But hey, he's going to have this performance to remember for a long time. And I thought he was outstanding. Who was your player of the game? And feel free to mention 2 or 3, because like I said, there were a lot of really good options to choose from.
Yeah. And this game was absolutely a night and day from the first game of the season from Penn State, right? Like, we dominated on both sides of the ball, time of possession. We weren't dominated in time of possession like the Penn State game, like you mentioned earlier. So I'm going to give my player of the game to somebody on the defense. Since you went on the offense, I'll go defensive side. I'm going to go with Reese Taylor. 7 tackles, 7 solo tackles, a sack, and then 2 tackles for loss from your second corner, right? Like, Tywone Mullen is the marquee corner. He was getting shout outs on the broadcast talking about how he might be the best corner in the Big Ten, or one of the best corners in the Big Ten. And hey, Reese Taylor ain't shabby either. Remember, he was recruited as a QB, right? He was a quarterback, and they moved him to corner. We thought he was going to play some wide receiver. He was playing a little bit on the offense and special teams because he's just such an athlete. But he has really blossomed as a corner, and he has taken it on his own. Again, another game where our corners are getting sacks. I know Tywone I think he had 1 QB hurries. 2 QB hurries and 2 pass deflections. Look, our corners are balling out. Our secondary is balling out. Even though we let up 344 yards in the air, I feel like that number is a little bit inflated just because we were missing Jamar Johnson in the secondary because he decided he should throw a punch at a person with a helmet, which is never something that you should do. I've never understood that at all. But we lost him, and the defense still was great. Still only let up 13 yards on the ground with our second safety in there. Devon Matthews, we can talk about him as well, getting a pick. Jalen Williams getting a pick. I think does Jalen Williams have 3 picks this year in all 3 games? Yeah. This team is really, really coming together and gelling together. It's amazing what they're doing. Micah McFadden, again, 5 tackles, 3 solo. He's going to get more tackles when they run the ball more. Obviously, linebackers going to be more involved when they're running the ball more, but they only ran the ball 18 times. And that's because they haven't getting nothing done. They're getting nothing on the ground. They had to go to the air, and that's where our corners were getting all the tackles. But this team is really coming together. It looks like a serious football team. We're getting national attention. We're in the top 10, folks. This is a very good football team. Enjoy it while we have it. We're going to talk about Michigan State in a bit. We have Ohio State the week after. I'm going to pretend like they don't exist because they're an entirely different story when it comes to the Big Ten. But we've seen 3 different kinds of games from this Indiana team. We've seen a game where nail-biter, overtime, NCAA finish for the ages at the goal line. Some can argue, but it was an instant classic. We had a game against Rutgers that felt comfortable, but then was the most comfortable game I've ever been through. And then this game where I felt like it was close, but we won by 17 in the end. And it really wasn't that close in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, this game wasn't close.
And we out-muscled Michigan. That's the thing.
Yeah.
I have to stress this. And it is all the example of this is that last drive where we just out-willed Michigan. They had to just stop us. They had 3 timeouts had to stop us, get the ball back to have some sort of shot at some sort of miracle comeback. And Stevie Scott is just running over people for 3 and 4 yard gains for every first down. Michigan State takes a timeout. We go 2 plays, get a first down. Michigan State takes another timeout. We go another play, another 2 plays, get a first down, and they just can't stop the clock anymore. We were just out-muscling the Michigan's defense. Again, they're probably tired because their offense didn't do anything. It was on the field for maybe 2 minutes per drive. But still, we were out-muscling University of Michigan football team.
Yeah.
The team that we hadn't won against since the 80s, right? It's been 30-something years since we beat Michigan. And the Detroit Free Press put something out. Crimson Cast talked about this on the weekend. They posted something saying Indiana out talents. Like there's a talent deficit between Indiana and Michigan. Are you kidding me? We've had 4 4-stars in the last 4 years. Michigan has had 40 4-stars, and they've had more 5-star recruits than we've had 4-stars. There is not a talent deficiency. There's a coaching deficiency. There's a development deficiency in Michigan. There is not a talent deficiency. There are talented players on that field. Ronnie Bell is a talented player. Zach Charbonnet is a talented football player. Hassan Haskins and Joe Milton are very talented football players. Yeah. Quinty Pay is going to be playing in the NFL and going to be a very good NFL player. There is not a talent deficiency.
Nope.
There is a development deficiency and a coaching deficiency in Michigan. Don't get it twisted.
Yeah, you were clear enough. I mean, Indiana out everythinged Michigan except out talented, and talent's a dangerous word too. True. Like I think we're talking about physical sort of speed and strength. Yes. That sort of thing. It's not like Indiana's lacking. Indiana's closed the gap in that area too over the last few years, no question about it. Mm-hmm. But make no mistake, guys like Quiddy Pay and linebacker Cam McGrone and safety Dax Hill and a lot of the offensive players that you mentioned. I love Giles Jackson, their receiver, who for some reason touched the ball just twice in that 17-point loss. He's got Tyreek Hill type upside, if you ask me. Yet for some reason he had, like I said, only had 2 touches for something like 1 yard or 3 yards or something overall. Indiana out everything Michigan. Let's just put it plain and simple. That's how it went. It's funny you mentioned Stevie Scott at the end because over the last 11-12 minutes of the game, Indiana held the ball for 8 minutes and 53 seconds. Ran 18 plays for 49 yards. And Indiana just kept plugging and chugging with those 3 and 4 yard Stevie Scott runs, the occasional deception thrown in there. And here's the deal. Michigan couldn't stop it. And that's the end of that. Now, what I want to ask you next, Matt, is now Indiana's 10th. They're 10th in the nation. And it's not a fluke. I mean, were there some breaks in the first 2 games? Sure. But Indiana had their best performance of the season on Saturday. It's reflected as such in the polls. Is this a one-year wonder? Or do you think this type of success is sustainable? Because while this year's been fun, and it's been great, and it's been exciting to watch, I don't know how it's going to be in 21 or 22 or 23. Is this type of thing sustainable? Could Indiana show up in the top 10 in future years as well?
I think we could be preseason top 10 next year, the way things are going. I call me a homer, right? You can just say in the comments, I'm a homer. That's fine. But when I'm looking at the outlook of the Big Ten, you look at Michigan, right? I think Michigan's going to be changing head coaches at the end of the year, right? So that's down one in the Big Ten East. I don't see. We're going to talk about Michigan State in a minute, but I don't see Michigan State making up how bad they've been in 1 year. Making that up, Rutgers isn't going to instantly out-talent us. You know, Greg Schiano is a good head coach and a good matchup there. Maryland looks interesting. We'll talk about Maryland when we get to Maryland, but Maryland looks interesting. Ohio State's Ohio State, but Ohio State's losing a lot of people after this year, right? Everybody expects Justin Fields, after they go on to the playoffs this year, to leave, go to the NFL. Like, he probably should. He's going to be a top 10 pick. He'll be a first-round draft pick. He should go. He's going to find a good team to sit there with in the NFL, develop, and become a good NFL quarterback. But they're losing Chris Olave. They're losing their running back from Oklahoma, Trey Sermon, whose name was escaping me until it just popped into my head. They're losing a lot of talent on the offensive end. That's a very senior-led team or upperclassman-led team going to the NFL in Ohio State. And you look at this Indiana team, Penix, sophomore, going to be back next year. Stevie Scott, junior, going to be back next year. Ty Freifogel is a junior, will be back next year. Or Ty Freifogel is a senior. Is he redshirt senior? Yeah. But
yeah, he's a senior. He and Whopper.
Oh, him and Whopper are both seniors. Okay, but Mile Marshers, Jacoby Hewitt will be back next year. We have 2 4-star wide receivers. We have a 4-star wide receiver coming in next year. We have a 4-star wide receiver sitting on the bench right now in Indiana. Most of the defense are juniors or sophomores or juniors, right? You look at Tylen Mullen, sophomore. Reese Taylor, I believe he's a junior. You look at I'm just doing this all on the fly, clicking on it because there's so many people to remember. Micah McFadden is a junior.
Yeah.
This defense, that is probably the best, not probably, it is our best unit on the team, are all led by juniors and sophomores. Like, all the leaders of this team are juniors and sophomores on that side. They're all going to be returning for next year. Like, we will be returning a majority of our starters from a team that I believe will probably end the season inside the top 15. That's a preseason top 10 ranking. And you look at what Ohio State's losing. You look at what the rest of the Big Ten is losing this year as a senior class. This team is going to be poised for a run next year, unlike any that we've seen in Indiana. Now, what comes the year after that, I have no idea, right? But as far as prolonged success, we are looking at an unprecedented amount of optimism coming from Indiana football going into next year.
Yeah, completely agreed, Matt. Actually, I was thinking about this earlier today. It's just there's so many components of this that seem transferable to future years. I mean, you just talk about the culture that Tom Allen has cultivated at Indiana, whether it's LEO or your word of the week or the enthusiasm like you saw on the sideline after Devon Monster Matthews intercepted that pass and Tom Allen just tackled him on the field. Yeah. He still has a pretty noticeable cut on his jaw. Tom Allen does that as. And then you talk about the youth on the team, right? And not only the guys you mentioned. How about Cam Jones, who's a junior, Jamar Johnson, who's a junior? There are a number of players who are going to be back next year. And then the recruiting, right? I mean, Samson James, we're not talking about him much, but he was a 4-star player who decommitted from or who once thought about going to Ohio State. How about Bo Robbins, the Carmel grad, who's going to be a big force on the defensive line in years to come? Cam Williams was a big linebacker who's yet to scratch the surface. Rashawn Williams, Jaquez Smith, Donovan McCulley. I mean, those are the 4-star recruits. But as we just talked about with Michigan, it's not like the 4-star recruits are the be-all, end-all. Even the 3-star guys that come in, or even just the guys that Tom Allen has gone out and chosen to come play for Indiana, the way those players are developed and the way those players buy into what this program is all about, that alone can elevate you over Michigan and Penn State. That's what we've seen so far. And in future years, and even this year, Indiana's probably going to lose to Ohio State. Indiana's probably going to lose to Wisconsin. But you know what? That's fine.
Are we going to lose to Wisconsin, though?
It may not happen. Well, we may not even play Wisconsin as far as we're concerned.
That's true.
And just to be perfectly clear, Indiana could beat Ohio State. We're going to get into that preview next week. But even if they don't, this success is sustainable. You're seeing a lot of traits and qualities and characteristics that can apply next year or in 2022 or in 23 or in 24 and in years that follow. It's got very little to do with who you're playing. It's got everything to do with what goes on in those four walls at Memorial Stadium every day. It's all about what happens on the practice field every day. And I think that's what's separating Indiana from a lot of the other Big Ten schools. And that's what's allowed Indiana to catch up to. I'm not going to say pass just yet, but at least catch up to and look like they belong on the same field as Michigan and Penn State. We'll see about Ohio State soon.
And I just one last thing I'd like to mention here. You're looking at the future, right? I think a lot of it's going to come down to, can recruiting success continue / get better again? Because the rest of the Big Ten is recruiting at an elite level. Michigan, when they get rid of Harbaugh at the end of the year, like we're all presuming they will, we'll get a head coach that will be able to recruit, right? They'll be back. Their development will get better under a new head coach. The morale will be better. They're going to be good. Michigan will always be decent. They'll never be terrible. I don't think the Brady Hoke years are going to just all of a sudden reappear and Michigan's going to be garbage. And even when they were garbage, IU still couldn't beat them. So, the continued recruiting success needs to continue. And I've seen people talk about Tom Allen leaving at the end of the year, right? And very much could be National Coach of the Year, right? If this success continues, we beat Michigan State this weekend. We're 4-0 going to Ohio State. We give Ohio State one heck of a game. we give Wisconsin one heck of the game. Who knows who wins or who loses that game? And we go into the game 9 of the Big Ten schedule with 1 or 2 losses.
6-2, 7-1, yeah.
7-1. Tom Allen's leading candidate for coach.
He's up there for sure.
He is up there for National Coach of the Year. And so usually National Coaches of the Year get hired away, right? Like that's usually what happens. If they're not at a big school, they're at a small school, those coaches are plucked away by a big program. So the likes of USC, who's maybe looking to fire Clay Helton at the end of the year, could look at somebody like Tom Allen. Now, do I imagine Tom Allen in USC Trojan colors and doing the LA lifestyle? No, I don't think that's a great match. I don't think that's a great match. But I'm sure that would make some people in USC happy because it's the way that Tom Allen has recovered this Indiana football team. I think Tom Allen stays. And in fact, I think he stays because of what I mentioned earlier. He's got a lot of people on this team coming back next year. He wants to run it back with this team, I'm sure, come next year, however this year unfolds. And then after next year, we have the same results next year, or the results that I'm expecting us to have. He might be looking somewhere else, and we'll say, thank you, Coach Allen. We love you so much. We'll build you a statue outside the front of the stadium. But that's for next year's talk. But I for the people that think he's going to leave after this year, I highly doubt that after this year he leaves unless somebody offers him like $25 million to coach over 3 years.
Same here. I don't get the vibe that. Let me put it this way. I get the feeling that Tom Allen wants to stay here. I mean, that's the tall and the short of it. I get the sense that he wants to stay here. And I've said this before, there's a very small overlap in the Venn diagram between people that can coach at Indiana and people who want to coach at Indiana. And Tom Allen is very much in that overlap. It's time for Who Won the Week this past week in IU Sports, where we find out key performers in Hoosier Nation that are going out and doing big things. How about the basketball? Let's take it to the hardwood. Women's basketball point guard Ali Patberg was named to the Lieberman Award watch list, which is a 20-player selection of players who are in contention to be the best point guard in women's college basketball. Patberg was a former Miss Basketball in the state of Indiana. She went to Notre Dame before transferring to play for Terry Morin in Bloomington. She's an excellent point guard. Highly recommend watching her either in person or on TV when women's basketball season starts, which also happens on November 25th. Trace Jackson Davis on the men's side was named to the preseason All Big Ten list. For some reason, there are 10 guys on that team. I don't make the rules. Trace Jackson Davis made the list. However, he also was named to the Karl Malone Award watch list for best power forward in college basketball, at least as of the preseason. Speaking of the preseason, Indiana was left out of the preseason top 25 poll, according to the Associated Press. If you look around the college basketball world, there are definitely some writers and some experts who believe that Indiana deserves to be in the top 25. But as of right now, when you take the entire AP poll, IU was 5th among the other teams on the outside looking in as far as receiving votes, which I guess de facto means they're ranked number 30, even though they won't have a number next to their name for the season opener. No schedule has been released yet. We know a few opponents. We know Providence is going to be in Maui. We know Butler is going to be Crossroads. We know Florida State's going to be Big Ten ACC. I think we know there are going to be 20 Big Ten games. That's unofficial still. Matt, what do you make of all of this IU basketball news that's come down the chute the last, 5 to 7 days? Anything stand out to you? Especially, what are your thoughts on IU being left out of the top 25?
I think it's fine. I like it. Gives a bit of a chip on our shoulder. We have something to prove. I don't like getting the Tennessee treatment where you just kind of put us in the top 25 because we kind of look talented and we're a blue blood. That's the Tennessee football treatment, by the way, for those of you wondering. I don't like getting that. So I like us to be able to prove ourselves and get in there and kind of be like, hey, they didn't have us ranked in the top 25. Look at all these Big Ten teams they have ranked in front of us. Like, let's go get ranked. Come on. And then also, we're talking about IU basketball news, and I'm gonna quickly do my social media shout out here. And that is John Rothstein on Twitter tweeted something about a little bit of a bird that he heard behind the scenes in Indiana, talking about Trey Galloway might be a starter as a freshman on the wing. We were just talking about in football how 3-star recruits are sometimes better than 4-star recruits, and Trey Galloway was a 3-star recruit. We have some good recruits in that recruiting class we just got in for IU basketball, but talking about defense and hustle and playmaking ability that Trey Galloway will bring on the wing, that's really interesting when talking about the starting lineup as somebody that I thought might redshirt this year going into the season. But as we've heard all over the summer, if you've been paying attention to IU basketball on Twitter, there's been some rumblings about Trey Galloway and about how well he's meshing and fitting into the program, which is a really good sign, especially with the talent that we have in that position, right? If he's going to be starting the wing, he's going to be starting up against people like Jerome Hunter, right? Who we saw what he could do at the end of last year. People like Anthony Leal and Jordan Geronimo, who we just brought in this recruiting class, and he's stepping up and taking a role in the team. So all this is really good news for an IU basketball program that's getting ready to start in 2 weeks. And we still have a fixed schedule yet. We don't have, we can't go get the posters at Assembly Hall. So we're definitely waiting for that. But I feel like that is absolutely taking a back burner to football. Yep. The weirdest thing I could possibly say when talking about Indiana athletics is that the men's basketball team has taken a backseat to football. But that is currently what is happening. Yeah. I'm all here for it.
Absolutely. And it's funny, right? You talked about Tennessee. It's almost like we need to talk about their basketball team more than their football team. Michigan, right? We should be talking about their basketball team more than their football team. Penn State's basketball team had a really good year last year, although they've had a turbulent offseason. With Indiana, that's the case. By the way, the women's team was ranked number 16 in the country in the preseason poll. So it's very much in play that both IU football, actually, I should say it's very conceivable that IU football, IU basketball, the men's team and the women's team are all ranked at the same time this year, which would be just outstanding to hear. Let's move on. Let's get back to football. Like you were saying, we should talk about football. Let's talk about football. Okay. We did get some news yesterday. That was Monday. That Indiana's Week 5 matchup against Ohio State, which seems like it's destined for a top 10 situation, top 10 battle between the two teams, will take place at noon on Fox. That'll be on November 21st. But let's talk about this Week 4 matchup first. Indiana 3-0 takes on Michigan State 1-2. Also a noon kickoff. It's the second noon kickoff consecutively after you started at the same time against Michigan. This game against Michigan State is on the road. It's in East Lansing, and it will be televised on ABC. Indiana is currently a 7.5-point favorite. The over-under is 51.5. So if you do the math, that's something like what? A 29-22 final. Something like that. That's what Vegas is thinking. 29-22, 30-22. in favor of the Hoosiers. It's supposed to be chilly in Michigan State, at Michigan State on Saturday in East Lansing. It's supposed to be in the high 30s, low 40s. It's supposed to be sunny, so not expecting much precipitation as Indiana is looking for their first 4-0 start since 1987. So just a year further along. It's not like you have to go back to, before Christ in order to find the last time Indiana started 4-0 in Big Ten play. That year, 87, they finished 8-4, but it was a pretty historic year as far as Indiana football is concerned. Michigan State is coming off a 49-7 loss to Iowa in a game where the Hawkeyes were just a 5.5-point favorite. Michigan State lost by 42. They played both their quarterbacks, and they trailed 35-0 at halftime. There was a clear and obvious hangover from that big win they had against Michigan the previous week. Matt, just a high-level look initially. Indiana, Michigan State. What's Indiana's response going to be like after the big win against Michigan? And what do you expect out of the Michigan State Spartans as we look ahead to week 4?
If you were expecting a hangover game, a bit of a trap game for Indiana, imagine a trap game against Michigan State for Indiana football. A trap game for Indiana. I don't think this is going to happen again. Their one word is relentless, right? Relentless preparation. I think Tom Allen's going to have them locked in. He was talking about in the Pat McAfee show today that he was losing his voice from yelling at them in practice to get them working. I'm sure they're going to be locked in and ready to go on Saturday. I'd be worried if I was Michigan State because a lot of IU's strengths play right into Michigan State's weaknesses.
Yep.
Rocky Lombardi, again, I made the joke before, his name might be Lombardi, but he has nothing to do with the other Lombardi. It's really good at throwing the ball to the other team. Last week had 3 INTs, I believe, including a pick 6. And this is an IU team that is it leading the Big Ten in interceptions, or is at least in the top 3 of the Big Ten in interceptions at the current state and time. We forced turnovers in our secondary, and this is a team that likes to turn the ball over in Michigan State. They did so in loads against Rutgers in week 1. For whatever reasons, Michigan's defense couldn't do it in week 2. And then in week 3, they had 3 picks in this game. So I look for Indiana's defense to really take advantage of what is a shaky Michigan State pass game. And then as far as Michigan State's rushing game, not great either. Had 32 rushes for 59 yards against Iowa. That's really reminiscent of the numbers that Michigan was pulling up against us. And Michigan's supposed to have a better running game than Michigan State. Yeah. So this defense should lock down. Again, it's a home game for Michigan State, though, so that might be a little bit to their advantage, though there's not a ton of fans there. The weather will be kind of cold. Our Florida players are going to be cold, trust me. You'll see them wearing sweatshirts. But it's going to be fine. I expect IU to stomp them on defense. However, our offense is going to have to get the run game going because Michigan State's secondary is actually pretty decent. It's better than Michigan State's, that's for sure. So we're not going to be getting the free looks that we were getting in the Michigan game. We're going to have to work for it. But again, like I said, 41 rushes for 226 yards for Iowa on last Saturday against Michigan State. I expect IU to get something going on the ground game. And I feel like every single game that we've gone through this year, by the way, this is a side tangent, has been gearing us up for Ohio State. Right? We had our first game was an experience with a close game, a nail biter. We didn't play well, but we pulled it out in the end. The second game is a much easier opponent, but looked pretty good in week 1, so we can't disregard them at all. We played one of our better games of the season, or are better than the first game, win the game pretty comfortably. Then we play an opponent that is ranked and is at home and is favored over us, and we beat them handily. So I feel like this has gone from worst to best. We're just slowly improving as the season goes on, each game. This week, I expect us to be the same and slowly improve, establish a running game, get some of those kinks worked out in live time, in real game time, going into Ohio State for week 5. If everything goes as I expect it will. Again, Vegas only has us favored by 8, but so far we've beaten Vegas. Vegas, I don't think, is a very good read on this team. So give me the Hoosiers on Saturday.
Yeah, Indiana is 3-0 against the spread this year, including 2 wins as underdogs. To close the loop on one thing you mentioned earlier, Indiana's picked off 7 passes, which is second in the Big Ten after Northwestern, who's actually put together one of the best defenses, not just in the Big Ten, but in the country. So it's no surprise that Pat Fitzgerald has his guys playing great. The Wildcats at 3-0 with Peyton Ramsey slinging passes for those guys in the backfield. But yeah, this Michigan State team is going through a major program overhaul right now. And if those of you listening don't pay daily attention to Michigan State football, their previous head coach, Mark D'Antonio, resigned abruptly in the offseason, but things had kind of been building up to it over the course of a year or two. A lot of their coordinators who had been around for 5, 6, 7 years, they all left too. So it's a new head coach, Mel Tucker, who used to be a big-time assistant at Georgia. He was an assistant with the Chicago Bears, defensive coordinator there. Mel Tucker's here with Michigan State running the show. He's the head coach there. He used to be at Colorado. I think that was his most recent stop before coming to MSU. Michigan State, they are not getting better every week. They were great against Michigan in week 2, but that's sandwiched around 2 really, really bad performances against Rutgers and then against Iowa, both lopsided defeats. They turned the ball over 7 times against Rutgers in a game they lost by 2 scores, if not even more. So Indiana's definitely got the upper hand in this game. Key matchups. Let's focus on some of these. Mm-hmm. The thing with Michigan State is you remember so much about their great defense with guys like Kenny Willekes and with guys like Raekwon Williams, but they're gone now. Really, if you look at the defensive side of the ball, they've got 3 really good players, if you ask me. Jacob Panasiuk on the defensive line, Antoine Simmons in that linebacking level, and then Shakur Brown's really good in the secondary. Like you said, their secondary overall is pretty solid, so Michael Penix can't be careless with the football like we may have seen once or twice against Penn State or against Michigan. The Indiana offense is going to have the advantage against the MSU defense. Michigan State's given up 37 points per game this year, which is 12th in the Big Ten. IU scoring 37 points per game this year, which is 3rd. Indiana's been a less explosive offense than I think we were expecting. They've only averaged 4.7 yards per play, which is actually close to the bottom of all of college football. So I think that's something that Nick Sheridan will like to see. There was really just one big explosive play that Indiana's had all year, and that was Whop Phillier going for something like 60 yards against Rutgers in week 2. Michigan State in general is a bad run defense. They've given up 11 rushing touchdowns this year. They only have 1 interception, but they've only given up 2 passing touchdowns. So as far as key matchups, I'm looking at Indiana's offensive line, who did a great job against Michigan. They've got to keep up that intensity against Michigan State. It wasn't perfect performance by IU's offensive line. Michael Penix did a good job getting rid of the football in those situations where he was pressured. But IU's offensive line, as usual, has to win their match against MSU's defensive line. Jacob Panasiuk is going to be a problem, but MSU only has had 4 sacks all season. Indiana's only given up 4. Stevie Scott has averaged 3.6 yards per carry this year, but he was at 4.7 last year. And if you think about how the weather could be a little shaky too on Saturday, you really want to get that ground game going. Indiana might also get Mike Caddick back. Caddick started on the offensive line in week 1 against Penn State. He was out last week, so that's something to see there. I also want to see Indiana use the play action to set up some big plays. Iowa did a great job of that last week with their tight ends running on crossing routes and their receivers running down the field. If you establish that run, guess what? You can use that play action to really catch that defense off guard and get some of those explosive plays. However, Michigan State's only given up 1 40-plus yard play all season. Indiana's only got 1 of those all year. So Michigan State's going to try to keep things in front of them. If Indiana can run the ball effectively, use that play action, you can really get Michigan State off guard. Matt, as you look at Indiana's defense going up against MSU's offense, the Wolverines are only scoring 20 points per game. They're only averaging 78 rush yards per game, which is lowest in the Big Ten. A lot of that has to do with bad game flow. I mean, they've gone down pretty quickly to both Rutgers and Iowa. And even that game against Michigan, they realized pretty quickly throwing the ball is the way to go. So some of those stats are a little unfair to Michigan State, but in general, Matt, what are some of the matchups you're looking for as you look at Michigan State's offense going up against the IU defense?
Right. Yeah. This is something that's very important. Again, looking at players like Jordan Simmons, right, who's been their main back. He's 37 carries for 132 yards in the season, averaging 3.6 yards per carry. Remember, I was talking about Stevie getting 4 yards a carry last week. He's averaging 3.6. This is what I'm talking about. You're looking at players like Jaden Reed, who's 13 receptions for 153 yards in the season for 2 touchdowns. Connor Hayward, 9 receptions, 52 yards, 2 touchdowns. They like to get their running backs heavily involved in the passing game. So far, from what I've seen out of Michigan State, again, 4 receptions and 9 receptions for Jordan and Connor, respectively, and 2 touchdowns for Connor, as I mentioned previously. So again, that's something that we're going to have to look out for. Our linebackers are going to be pressed into maybe being in coverage a bit more than they've been used to through the past 2 weeks. Given that Michigan wasn't really a threat to throw to the running backs and Penn State wasn't a threat to really get their running backs in the passing game. And again, Rocky Lombardi is not a mobile quarterback, so we don't have to worry about that either. Has 17 attempts for -6 yards on the season, which means he's getting sacked, not being able to run the ball as much as he would like to, get out of the pocket. And that is something that this IU defense should take advantage of by rushing 4 and or blitzing a corner off the side and getting into the backfield and sacking this Michigan State quarterback.
Yeah, 2 other guys to look out for are the receivers, the wide receivers, Ricky White and Jalen Naylor. They're dangerous too, so Reese Taylor and Tywan Mullen will be focused on guarding them. And then, of course, like we've talked about once or twice here, IU's defense is going to have a really good chance to take the football away in this one too. You saw 2 interceptions against Michigan. Indiana's got 7 interceptions on the season. Michigan State's thrown 5 of their own. So you could definitely see a situation, especially if Indiana gets out in front, where you force Lombardi into throwing some interceptable passes. Now, I do want to mention, just because we need to cover all our ground here, Michigan State's backup, Peyton Thorne, did come in the game at the end of their loss to Iowa. He wasn't all that impressive, but it's possible that you wake up on Saturday morning and hear that Peyton Thorne is getting the start for Michigan State instead of Lombardi. It wouldn't be a complete shocker. Thorne was just in the game very briefly. He threw 1 pass, which ended up incomplete. But again, when your other QB can't complete 50% of his passes and throws 3 interceptions, anything and everything is in play. So, Matt, it's time for our prediction. Let's go. Indiana, Michigan State. The Hoosiers are 7.5-point favorites. Indiana's 3-0. MSU's 1-2. What are you thinking? And everyone's got to listen to you because you hit the nail on the head with Michigan. So everyone just pay attention to Matt. Here we go.
Yeah, 3-score win for IU again this week in East Lansing. I predicted almost correctly to a T last week. Give it to me again. I'm thinking 37-17 IU. In East Lansing, I don't think this is even close. I think Michigan, it's going to be 37-10. ABC is going to be doing nothing but complimenting the Hoosiers, and then Michigan State's going to get a lazy, touchdown at the end, make it 37-17, and thus the Hoosiers right out of East Lansing 4-0.
Yeah, and I'm going to pick the Hoosiers this week too. I would usually be a little concerned about having to go on the road against a team like Michigan State after big win. If you remember, I wasn't all that confident with Indiana's game against Rutgers a couple of weeks ago. But 2 things. First of all, I love that dominate is the word of the week for Indiana football. Relentless is the word of the year. Dominate's the word of the week. And then Indiana did go into Michigan State last year and lose a game that I think they're a little upset about. And, you've got a lot of guys on this team who played in that game last year. I think they're going to be fired up. The motivation's going to be there. I actually think Indiana's going to buy more. Crazy enough, I think Indiana's going to win this game 45-17. I think Indiana's offense is going to figure it out. I think Michael Penix is going to be looking pretty good. I think Stevie Scott's going to be carrying the football effectively. So I'm excited to see Indiana go into East Lansing and win. And if IU loses, I will not be happy next week after my very heartfelt apology at the start of our show today. Let's do our last segment, Matt. It's our Big Ten picks of the week. Last week, we both did pretty well. Your spread pick was Northwestern covering the 3.5. And they went out against Nebraska and won by 8. So you hit that one. And your upset pick was IU beating Michigan. And that happened. And so far on the season, you're 2-1 on your upsets, thanks to the Indiana Hoosiers. You're 1-1-1 against the spread because Purdue and Illinois was a 7-point spread, and Boilermakers ended up winning by 7, so that ended up being a push. As you look at the slate this week, what's your upset pick? What's your spread pick? I'm curious to hear what you have to say in a pretty interesting week in the Big Ten.
Oh, man. Upset pick. Give me, and it irks me to say this, but give me Nebraska over Penn State. I think Penn State is a walking corpse at this moment. So give me Penn State. I think Rutgers is going to beat Illinois. I think Wisconsin's going to beat Michigan. I think Northwestern's going to beat Purdue. So that's fine. The over-under pick is give me the over on the Indiana winning. Indiana's favorite at 7.5. That's clearly a terrible line by Vegas. This is not a great Michigan State team. I'm hitting their stride. I don't care that it's away in Michigan State. That doesn't count for in the COVID years or the COVID years. So I feel like we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna win by 3 or 4 scores, and 7.5 will look like a laughing stock at Vegas. So put your money on it, folks.
All right. Man, these upsets are weird. I like your Nebraska pick. I think they're going to come out feeling good about. I think Nebraska's going to be feeling pretty good about themselves against Penn State. But here's what I'll do. I'll take Minnesota. Minnesota, for some reason, is a home underdog to Iowa. I think Iowa overachieved last week. So I'm going to take Minnesota to upset Iowa on Friday night, a little Friday night Big Ten special. And then the spread pick, guys, we saw Michigan last week. They're not good. Wisconsin's going to beat the crap out of them. Yes. So I'm going to take Wisconsin covering the 4 right now.
Fair.
I can't believe Michigan was a favorite on Sunday afternoon in this game when the lines first came out, but I've got Wisconsin covering the 4 right now. I think they're going to win.
Favored?
Yeah, early on in the week. Yeah, they were. It's crazy. I don't get it. I don't make the rules. Hopefully they play that game. I don't know. I don't get it. All right, Matt. We've got those we marked down. We're going to keep track of those all year. By the way, I'm 1-2 on my upset picks this year, but 2-1 against the spread. I think you'll take better than 50% there.
True.
Closing thoughts, Matt. Indiana's got an interesting game coming up on Saturday. We have some basketball news that came down the last few days. Everything is up to you. It's your call. Here we go.
Look, we've had a what would normally be a rough stretch of games, right? We have Michigan State, Ohio State. We're in the second of those 3 games. And in a normal year, I'd be complaining about how the Big Ten schedule has broken out terribly for us. But I feel like this week is kind of a gift for us. Like, Michigan State is not that good. They're going through a bit of a transition, as Nithin has stated previously. And that is very apparent in their last 2 previous games. You have a upset win against Michigan that now looks like an absolute fluke. You have a loss against Rutgers and a blowout loss to Iowa, and an Iowa team that we don't even think is that good in the first place. So we have an IU team that has looked solid through 3 weeks. We don't care what the heck, I mean, what the heck the Vegas has to say about us, and or people saying we've had a weak schedule because Penn State goes up and loses to Maryland last week, and Michigan hasn't looked great, and Rutgers is Rutgers. I don't care. This should be a win for IU, and we'll be moving on into Ohio State 4-0. Big things are happening with this program. There's a lot to look up for IU. There's a lot, again, that we talked about that you can build on for future years going for IU. And it's going to lead all into what is going to be a top 10 game in Columbus versus Ohio State, which I am so pumped up and ready for. Let's just focus. Let's dominate. Let's be relentless. Let's beat Michigan State this weekend.
Yeah, I love that. In fact, my closing thought here is that, look, Indiana had lost 24 straight games to Michigan before winning on Saturday. Indiana had lost 22 of 23 to Penn State. And all of a sudden this year, IU's 2-0 against those 2 teams. You put the numbers together, over the last how many ever years, Indiana had lost 46 of 47 games against Penn State and Michigan. They've won both of them this year. That alone, no matter how the rest of the season goes for this IU football program, that alone should get Tom Allen an extension or a statue or a PhD or whatever other certificate of achievement they want to give him. That alone is an unbelievable accomplishment. And again, they crushed Michigan. Don't come at me and tell me, oh, 17-point game, this, that, whatever. Indiana out everything to Michigan for 60 minutes on Sunday. There is no doubt. There is no debate. There is no discussion. And who knows how high the ceiling is, because college football hasn't seen a story like this in a long time. When you've got a Power 5 team disrupting things, it's been a long time. I remember Mississippi State had a really good year a few years ago with Dak Prescott at quarterback. Otherwise, it's kind of the same old story at the top of college football. Already this year, you've seen Notre Dame beat Clemson. You've seen Alabama get tested by Ole Miss. They didn't lose. They got tested. And now you're seeing Indiana really make some noise up top. So that alone, like I said, just the Penn State-Michigan stuff alone is more than enough to just say, wow, what a special year it's been for IU football. And there's still so much more to go. That about wraps it up, folks, for our 168th show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your support. Thank you to our live audience as well. We always appreciate those of you hanging out during our chat as well. To hear more fantastic episodes like the one you hear today, be sure to follow Indiana HQ to make sure you don't miss any in the future. You can also go to indianahq.com to find it all in one place. Lastly, if you enjoy our show, leave us a review. Tell a friend, share our links. Your support really helps us grow this podcast and reach more passionate IU fans such as yourself. But as always, thanks for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.